Well, what's everyone's Matt Rosick, and this will actually be, since I'm kind of learning this chroming process, I'm going to go ahead and do the first work in progress on the Bushi Silver Surfer. Now, if you follow me, this particular Silver Surfer, Bushi Silver Surfer, is the master print, meaning that this is the file that was printed from the STL file, cleaned up, and then used to mold all the other ones. So because of that, he needs some work. And also, my client wants him one piece. So he comes in the torso, two arms, two legs, and the head. So he's actually not in too much. He's not actually not too bad as far as damage wise. Molding is a very harsh process on a casting. The wave itself is what got damaged. Really, it's all cracked. But since he wants this one piece, I have to glue them all together and seam him. Luckily, since this is the master print, everything fits together damn near perfect. So all I really have to do is kind of glue it together, and I'm gonna I'll do my battery's about to die. I'm gonna use some 5-minute epoxy. I'm gonna let it ooze out and clean that up. It'll last once plugged in. But before I even do that, I want to do some light sanding on the pieces. They look pretty good. Like I said, this is the master print that they use for molding and casting, so the surface looks actually really good for the most part. There are a few little imperfections here and there, but it'll be easier to kind of sand on this while he's broken up like this. So I'm just going to go over them again with my trusty 3M ultra fine sanding sponge. I'm just going to do this dry. It'll cut a little quicker, and he's going to get reprimed anyway. So first thing I'm going to do is lightly sand over all the pieces with this, and get out any little surface imperfections. Because like I said, this is the master print that they use for molding, so there may be some defects in the surface from the molding and from the molding process. So it'll be a challenge to chrome this guy when he's all one piece. I'll have to figure out a way to mount him to something so I can spin him around and get to all the areas. It's much easier to paint something in pieces than as a whole. But this is like what I was saying in my chroming video the other day. I want to have a bunch of stuff ready to go to chrome once I figure it out. That way I'm not wasting chemicals. This actually shouldn't take too long to sand down because it's pretty good. And again, not really trying to sand the primer off. I just want to go through and do a light pass over the surface to get any minor imperfections out that may have been there from the molding process. So like this leg is done. It took me maybe 5 minutes to do. It looks good. And it'll take epoxy real nice. It's got the hash marks in there to take epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and sand all this down, and then we'll come back and do some epoxy. Alright, so I went over the torso and the legs with the ultra fine sanding sponge. Now I'm going to mix up, I'm actually use some 15-minute epoxy to give me a little more working time. And I need to see if I can clamp this guy together. So I like to kind of dry fit it and then get a clamp and see if there's a way I can clamp this to hold it while it cures. So I'm going to do one leg at a time. It's a good fit. So I think if I come in here like this, and I don't need to put a lot of pressure on it. I just want enough pressure to hold the leg in and have some ooze out. Because then I'll just wipe up the ooze out with some alcohol, and that will fill in most of the gap. So that looks like that will work very well. So get some 15-minute epoxy going here. Let's make sure I got the right. There, okay. I really don't need to do anything to the joint to get it ready because it's got these nice hash marks in there, and the epoxy will grip that very well. And there's a nice big pin, so I'm going to mix up enough to have ooze out. Tricky part with this one is going to be mounting this in order to paint it and chrome it and everything. I have to probably build something to do that. This is probably way more epoxy than I need. I do want to make sure I've got plenty of paper towels standing by and some alcohol standing by so that when I start to get ooze out, I can clean it up relatively easily. So there's that. Got the 2 parts in there. And now with having this much in there, it's probably going to want to kick off relatively quick. So the more you mix up, the faster it goes off because it builds up heat pretty quick. So I'm not gonna mix it real fast. Again, because if I mix it too fast, then it'll start to kick off quicker than I want. Pretty good. I'm going to this joint right here. So I want to go to that where the peg goes to. I want that to go down in there. Now it's starting to warm up, so it's going to start wanting to kick off here in a second. And just so I make sure I got good contact all the way around the joint, I'm going to just put a light coat on the actual leg where those hash marks are. Now I've got a lot in here, so I'll probably have a lot of ooze out, which is fine. Maybe I'll have any ooze out. Okay, I'll put some more in there. Doing epoxy is a very messy process. I tend to get it everywhere. Yeah, I got it on the torso, it's all right. Half the challenge is getting this to stay where I want it while I work with it. Put that to the side. Alcohol here. I'm going to wipe it off on that torso, upper part of the torso. Okay. Well, I don't think I'm going to get any ooze out. I was hoping I would. I got a lot in there. But apparently there was a pretty good void. Oh, there we go. There it comes. That's what I wanted. Okay. So now what I can do is, since I got that there, try to stay in frame here. So I can just wipe this. I'll probably have to do a little bit of putty work, but this will do a good job of filling the majority of the gap that's there. Mind frame. I need to call them back, but I got this going. I need to clean this up before it starts to get too hard. All sorts of shit's happening. I tell her I'll call her back. All right, so that's gonna be really good. So just gonna let that sit and cure. And then once that's one is done, we'll put the other one in and clamp it. So there's that. All right, so we just gotta let that set up, and then we'll do the other one. All right, so I got that leg epoxied last night and clamped it. I went ahead and epoxied the arms on too. The other one, I clamped one on last night. I just put it on the other one. Same process, just epoxy them on, clamp them, and wait for the epoxy to dry. So I'm going to work on the head while that's curing, and then when I get to the other leg, I'll actually put him on the board and epoxy him, because one thing, sorry, my dog's barking. So when pieces come together and they're meant to come apart, there is some play in the pieces for them to fit onto things. So like I epoxied that one leg. Hold on one second. Sorry, my dogs are freaking out. So anyway, there's some play in those pieces for them to fit like on the surfboard. So I clamped that one leg on and epoxied it, and I was about to put the other leg on, clamp it and epoxy it, but I wanted to put it on the board first to make sure that it would fit. So now that I've got one leg solid, the other leg needs a little play, and there's a little bit of a gap. So what I'm going to do is, once the arms are dried all the way, I'll actually put epoxy around the next leg, put it on the board. That way it will be epoxy, and I'll like clamp the feet to the board. That way it's in the right position while the epoxy dries. And then I'll just do a little filling in that gap. So this is the head, obviously, and there's a hole here, and I'm not sure exactly what that hole is from. My guess would be from the molding process. So I need to sand this down smooth and fill it. I'm just going to get a rough sanding stick here, and there's like a little bit of resin sludge or something on the top here. And when you're sanding these, you see this part is the resin print, and this yellow stuff is putty that this factory had used to smooth out some of the areas. I'm going to sand this smooth, and I'm going to put my own little filler in there. I'll actually drill that out a little bit. Not sure what that hole's there for, but we're going to drill it out a little bit. Like that. And just make sure that that gets filled well. So I bought myself another little container of Bondo, so that's what we're going to use to fill this. And Bondo, you need bare metal or bare resin to stick to. It won't stick to primer. They do make fillers that do stick to primer, and they're usually more like putties, but they're really kind of runny and thin, and I really like those. They sand easily, but they're quite a bit more expensive than Bondo. Like a gallon of Bondo is like $30, where the other stuff is like $60 or $70. So again, gallon thing of Bondo here. And by the way, Bondo is just a brand name. It's not everyone refers. It's just body filler, and Bondo is the brand name. So I don't have my. I'm not wearing my mic because it's easier for me to work, and you can hear all the stuff in the background, which are my dogs whining and barking and all that stuff. So sorry about that. I put this stupid lid on Bondo, which is really hard to get off. There it goes. I put a hole in the top of the lid. So in doing that, I put a hole in the lid here, which I'll need to seal up because if I don't seal that up, it will dry out. Let's see. I was going to get a piece of cardboard. I can just use the back side of this for mixing. I don't need a whole lot. So I'll just use the back side of this card. I'm just over here opening the Bondo. Here's my, when I'm in this kind of mode of work, there's just, again, crap everywhere. I don't clean up until I get done with like all the filling and stuff because it's just a messy process. I'm just going to take some of this filler off the lid actually. There's some there. Again, I don't need a whole lot. I'm just filling that little hole, so I'll just take a little bit. Just a little bit like that. Somewhere I have a rubber mallet. What did I do with it? Look at this. Anyway, need to seal this up. I'll just put a piece of tape over that hole. And then luckily they gave me some red hardener. The last time I bought this, it was white hardener, and it's really hard to tell how much hardener you have when the hardener's white. So you want to knead this stuff up because a lot of times it separates within the container. And with this much filler, you don't need a lot of hardener. That's like way more than enough right there. All right, mix this up. This much hardener, this is going to kick off pretty quick. Mix it till you have a consistent color. You don't want to see any gray stripes in there because those areas will not cure. It'll just be gummy. You can't sand it or paint over it. You notice I'm kind of pushing on it. That gets any air bubbles out as you mix it. I'm not stirring it, I'm pushing it down and kind of buttering it back and forth. Helps get air bubbles out of it as you mix it up. And I want to make sure I fill that hole up all the way. Push it down really good. And it's going to be messy. It's fine. Just like that. Alright, I'll let that dry. I'll come back and sand it. Like I said, with this much hardener in there, it should kick off within a few minutes here. When I used to do work on cars, I would mix it pretty light, so I'd have plenty of working time to spread it out smooth. And just reduce your sanding time. If you can spread it as smooth as possible, it really cuts down on your sanding time. But I'm just doing this one spot, so it's not that big of a deal. But when you're doing like a whole car, yeah, it really helps when you spend the time to sit there and smooth it out. All right, so I'll come back when it's cured. Alright, so it's had a few minutes to kind of set up. We're going to sand this down a little bit. It's not 100% cured, but we can start knocking it down a little bit with the coarse sanding stick. I guess I can bend them. So we don't want it, we just want this, use the coarse to kind of knock off the hard edges. We don't want to sand this, use this to sand it all the way down, because we'll just have to do more putty work. It's just to get the kind of the basic shape going. Hit the edges to start blending the edges, feathering them. That's pretty good with that. Now I got a 180 grit here. I mean, I'd be cured enough to hit it with that. You see I'm coming into the putty like this, and that will help feather the edges and blend it in so it's a smooth transition, and hit it from all the angles. When you sand body work, you don't want to just go in one direction. You typically go in angles. So like 45 and then 45 the other way, 45, 45, and then turn it, 45 and then 45. And what that does is it ensures that you get a even sanding of your filler. If you just sand in one spot, you're going to sand a shape that you don't want into it. So come this way, and then come this way. Turn it, go this way, and then this way. So right now I'm really just working on getting the edges blended. You see I'm not really hitting the center of this right now. I did want at the very beginning to knock down the high spot, because I had a big bulge of filler there. So now I'm just kind of working on getting the edges to feather. I'll hit this head with the 2K primer since I got this body work here. Body work, putty work. And I'll probably end up hitting the whole thing with the 2K primer before I do the clear coat and prep for chroming. Need to get some more sanding sticks. These are all used up pretty good. Can you call up to Owen, because I'm in the middle of recording a video? Have him come down and get her and put her in the playroom with them. Our basset hound constantly whines all the time. switch to the 180. It's gonna feel pretty good. Go back to the course a little bit. I think I may do a test where I use Styrylrest primer and clear coat over that, because I really like it and it sands really, really easy. I don't think I have to use a 2K primer. I thought I did because that's what the Spectrachrome process requires. Is you have to use a 2K primer underneath the Spectrachrome base coat. But I'm not doing Spectrachrome. I think I can do Styrylrest primer and then shoot the 2K clear coat over that. This feels pretty good. Still got a little bit of bump here. The putty or Bondo. So you feel over it, see if you feel any, so all the edges are feathered very well. I don't feel any edges, and I don't feel a bump of filler, so I think we're good. So I'll go ahead and give the whole head a sanding with this super fine sanding sponge, since I'm going to hit the whole thing with primer anyway. And then once I get this re-primed and sanded down again, I'll go ahead and epoxy them onto the. Actually, no, I'll go ahead and epoxy them onto the body before I do that, because that way I can avoid doing 2 rounds of primer on the head. I'll get them sanded down and get this epoxied onto the body, and I'll just hit it with primer at the same time as I do the rest. All right, so there you go. Dust. So now I got that hole filled. He's been sanded down and looks good. All right, so he's ready to be glued onto the body. And for that, so what I did on the arms, I'll show you right here. There's magnets in here, but in order to get some better grip, I just kind of go around and I just do some really shallow holes like this in the joints. What this does, it just kind of, these actually have like little keys for the epoxy to go into. Gives it a little more grip. I probably don't need to do this, but I like to safe. And I do it on the other side too, on the neck of the body. So now I got the little holes, or shallow holes, that I'll you know, put the epoxy into, and then when I do that on the neck, you got a really strong bond. That epoxy will never come apart. If anything breaks, it'll be somewhere else on the statue, but it won't be the glue joint, that's for sure. So there you go. So I'll do those little holes on the neck and glue him on, and then the last thing to do is to glue the other leg on, and I'll show you that process. Like I said, I'm going to have him on the board. I'm going to glue the leg on. I'm actually going to clamp his feet to the board so he's in the right position, and then as the, you know, put epoxy on the leg and the joint, put them together, and then clamp them to the board so he's in the right position while that epoxy cures, and then he's locked in the right position. So when I do that, I'll come back and show you that process. All right, so where we left off on this guy was the last clip was that I had gotten the arms epoxied on, got the head epoxied on, and I got this leg epoxied on. So I have some cleanup to do in here and some putty work, no big deal. So now the trick is I gotta get the other leg on, but I just can't put it on, clamp it, and glue it. And the reason being because this was designed to take apart and put it back together. And so all the legs had some play in them. And when you glue things together, you take that play apart. You take that play away. So what you got to do is, because if I was to glue this leg on, clamp it, and epoxy it, right here where it is, that's at a weird angle, so I may not be able to hold this. So I don't want to drop it or break any fingers. He wouldn't go back on the board. The keys don't line up. So what I have to do is put him on the board like this. I'm going to clamp this foot into place. Let's see if I'm on. Well, can't tell if I'm on frame. I think I'm on frame, yeah. And then I'm going to, while this is on here, let me put him. It's really awkward because it's easy to do when he's on the wave because the wave is holding the board, but it's really hard to do this when there's nothing holding. So if I just put him on the board here, where everything lines up, put that in there. Okay, so that's where his feet need to be. But now you notice there's a gap right here. So if I was to just take this off, glue the leg, clamp it, he wouldn't go back on the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp him, and I'm going to clamp his feet into place so they're where they have to be. And then I'm just going to epoxy this. And what I'll do is I'll go back in later and fill that gap with some Aves Super Sculpt Aves two-part epoxy, which will fill that gap and also strengthen that joint. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay. So I like to do a dry run first. So basically, I need 2 clamps. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a clamp kind of as a kickstand. Let's put it over here so it's not interfering with him. Okay, so now he'll stand up by himself. Sometimes I have a good idea, not very often. I'm going to move my camera 1 second. Okay, that's better. So they can kind of see what I'm doing. So anyway, I've got this clamp here as a kickstand. And I was mentioning before, now that I have this leg epoxied, if I was to just not have him on the board, put that leg in, clamp it and epoxy it, he wouldn't go back on the board. And simply because this was designed not to be one piece, it's designed to come apart. I'm pretty sure I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the production pieces are like that too. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. The arms are magnetized, but maybe the legs were glued. I've never seen a production piece. Like I said, this is the master print, so I could be wrong on that. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically clamp him into place here. I like to do a dry run. So I make sure that he's flat. And where he needs to be. So that's where he needs to be. Another thing my client's gonna have me do is he's gonna have me sand these waves off. He doesn't like them, so we're gonna take those off. But I don't want to take this off until he's set. So that's where he needs to be. Now I guess I could. I don't want to clamp it. I could clamp it a little bit, but I don't want to clamp it too much. There actually there may not be a place to clamp here. It's just a weird angle. Let's see. I don't think there is. Play around with it. It wouldn't hurt to have it a little tight on there, but I don't want it too tight so where the keys don't line up and I can't get them back on the board. Let's see here. Really, I need like a clamp from the knee to the butt. I don't think these jaws are deep enough. Oh, maybe. Here we go. Okay, so while he's on the board, I can put a little pressure on it like this. Not a whole lot. Oops. I'll also clamp this foot into place just to make sure it's where it needs to be. Again, this is just a dry run, so after I have the epoxy mixed up, I have an idea of what I need to do. So that can go there. That's going to go there. And then while he's on there, I can do this. There we go. So that's how we'll clamp them while the epoxy dries. Just like that. And so it'll close up the gap on top. I'll have a little gap on the bottom and the back side. And then he should fit on there nicely. Now this male key over here is cracked, so I'm going to have to fix that too. I'm going to wait till that after he's done. Because I may end up once I epoxy that, I may do some re-keying on the bottom of the foot with some Aves. So let me get some epoxy mixed up and we'll come back and do this. Alright, so I got equal parts of 15-minute epoxy in here. Just going to mix this up slowly. And we'll coat the inside of the hip and then the key on the leg. I went around the joint on the leg and add some more grooves with the file and sanded most of the primer off. So the female joint in the hip, most of the print is exposed. There's not much primer in the joint, so it's good to go. Got my alcohol here and some paper towels. I was anticipating some ooze out and some dripping. And I just use a Q-tip a lot of times to, I don't have any epoxy brushes. I just use a Q-tip. Go in there and kind of coat. Pour some of this in there first. Use this Q-tip to kind of cut the joint. Yeah, leg. I don't know, it seems like whenever I do epoxy, it just gets everywhere, no matter how hard I try. It gets everywhere. I'd rather have too much and have it ooze out than not have enough. All right. Paper towel ready here. Some good ooze out. Plenty in there. Nice together. Got a little bit of time here to work. Get them lined up. Should have plenty of epoxy in there. So let's go ahead and clamp these feet down. Really want to make sure he's flat on the board. I got some ooze out coming. No big deal. Yeah. Now let's see if I can get a little clamp on his leg here. Let me do this. Really want to get a little pressure on the joint. Just like that. And then let's see if I can get this in here. This side, maybe. Really, I can get one here. So you can see all that ooze out right there. It's no big deal. It's actually what we want. a matter of cleaning this up with some alcohol while the container continues to ooze, and then just leave this to cure. And hopefully get most of that epoxy will do a good job of filling that gap most of the way. Just reduce the amount of putty work I got. That's it. That's how you do that. Now, after this dries, take them off the board, and we'll see how flat he sits for the board. Like I said, the key on this side, the male part of the key, has got damaged in the molding process, so it's got to be shored up a little bit. I just got to work around the joint, try to get as much of this cleaned up before it cures, especially where I can't get to, which is right in the get in there. Oops. There you go. So now this guy's one piece permanently. Let's not get down way down there. Sorry, you can't see what I'm doing. Just trying to clean out the epoxy down here where the leg at the very kind of up in this area, because I can't, we'll be able to get to that later. Okie dokie. So this is 30-minute epoxy. I'll just let it sit overnight before I take the clamps off, and then we'll see what we got. And after this, I'll fix the key if it needs to be fixed in any way, and then it's on to puttying the joints and stuff and seaming them. Yeah, there you go. So when I come back, whenever that is, we'll work on making sure he still sits on the board nicely and firmly after the clamps are taken off. Like I said, again, I've never seen the production piece, so I'm not sure if the legs are a solid part of that. I think that from what I've seen, just from a couple of videos from Creations and Chrome, that the arms and the heads are separate on the production pieces. But I think the legs would be one piece onto the body. Could be wrong. So another thing is that since my client wants these waves off, those actually help line him up on the board. I mean, they're shaped perfectly to his feet. So let's see if that has any effect on him standing on the board straight or anything like that. So maybe I'll talk to him and maybe I just get rid of the waves just around his feet and leave that one where his foot is, where it's molded to his foot, I think that's a smart thing to do, and not take off the part right around his foot, but maybe just take off, like there's 3 ribs, 1, 2, 3 here, and there's 2 on the front. Maybe just take those off, and then leave the ones that his foot actually sit into. That'll just help keep him stable on the surfboard, I think. All right, so that's it for that, and then this work in progress will continue after he dries and we take him off the board. Okay, so continuing on the Bushi Silver Surfer, we got them all epoxied together, and I've gone through and I've just gone around all the seams and sanded the primer off and any of the excess epoxy. So now we're going to go and seam this. I'll show you one on camera, and then I'll just do the others off because, again, a lot of things I show on videos are the same thing over and over again. Just you know, just do it for each thing. So I've got a little Bondo body filler here. I just bought a brand new gallon of it. So it actually works really well. As this stuff gets older, it kind of dries out and it's harder to work with. So I just used up the first gallon I bought like over a year ago. So I'm only going to do a little bit at a time. I'm going to take it just a little bit off the lid here. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to smooth it out as much as possible to avoid as much sanding. So let me get the camera kind of, I'll work on this leg here, on this seam right here since it's kind of in the view of my camera. I'll get closer. And I'm just going to mix up a little bit. So I just have a little bit of my piece of cardboard. I'm not going to put a lot of hardener in it because I actually want this to kind of dry slowly. So I'm just going to put a little bit on my, just a little dab right there. And mix this up really good. This actually would be enough to do this whole seam. Let's see if it doesn't start to set up on me, I'll be able to work with it pretty easily. I'm going to just use my fingers really to put it on. Now some of these are going to be hard to get to, like this one's going to be hard to get to in there. With my fingers I'll do some sculpting tools and stuff, but so I'm going to take this, mix it up real good, like that. And what I'm going to do is put that there, paper towel. Got a little lacquer thinner right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my finger and I'm just going to push it into the seam like this. Obviously go all the way around. Okay. So basically got our filler on there. Now I'm just going to take a little lacquer thinner on my finger, just a little bit. I'm just going to use it to kind of smooth it out. I'll still have to do some sanding, but this will hopefully will help reduce that a little bit. So if I needed to like reinforce this joint, I would use Aves epoxy, but since I've got these are glued in with 30-minute epoxy really well, I don't think I need to do that. So I'm just going to smooth it out a little bit just to help reduce sanding. Sorry, I'm probably blocking the view with my head. So basically just like that. And since I don't have a lot of hardener, that'll take this 15-20 minutes to dry. And I'm just going to work one seam at a time. It always gets messy and nasty in the process until you're kind of done. All right, so we're going to go ahead and let that dry, and then we'll come back and sand it. All right, so let's have plenty of time to dry, and we're going to give this a sanding. Right now I've just got like an old fine sanding sponge. Actually, may not be. I need to order some more of the fine sanding sponges. I also need to just get some like coarse sanding paper. Take them off the board just to be safe, so I don't mess anything up, I think. But again, lots of sanding. So I'll just sand one area. That's because you guys get the idea. I thought I had some coarser. Here we go. So basically you can sand this down until it's smooth, and then I'll do all the other ones, and then we'll come back after that. All right, so continuing on with the Bushi Silver Surfer. I'm trying. This was actually a project that was kind of like the reason I'm working on this right now, because I have the Gravin Labs Silver Surfer just about ready to chrome, and I want to be able to chrome several things at once. So that's why I'm kind of working on this project at the same time. That wasn't planned that way, but that's just kind of my thinking. So I've gone through. I've got them all seamed. I did the legs with Bondo because it was easier to get. It was easy to get in there and sand. The rest of the seams I did with Aves, two-part epoxy, simply because some of the areas would be really hard to get sandpaper into. So what I did my best is to go in there and blend it using the Aves safety solve, and I just put this on my finger and actually just kind of messed that up a little bit. I got a little bit in the cup here, and this stuff is workable depending on how you work with it. I know a lot of sculptors use it. Right away, it's pretty pliable and pretty soft, and as it hardens, obviously it's harder to work with, but then you can like carve it and stuff. So my goal was to get these seams as smooth as possible without having to sand them, because again, getting sandpaper into these little nooks and crannies would be just about impossible without really damaging surrounding areas. So as this is setting up and getting harder, I'm going in every once in a while some of the safety solve and just kind of hitting with a Q-tip and just trying to smoothing it out. Because when it's soft right away, it's really easy to overwork it and kind of, you get it where you want, and you try to go do something, then you kind of mess it up. So as this sets throughout the day, it'll take, I think it says like basically 24 hours really to cure all the way, but it's like workable for like up to 8 hours, I think, depending on what you're wanting to do. I think you can like sculpt it and carve it for up to like 6 or 8 hours. So anyway, as this kind of sitting on the side throughout the day as I'm working on some of the stuff, I'm going to just kind of go through and, smooth it out a little bit as much as I can. I will have to try to sand it just a little bit, but any of my marks from the Q-tips and stuff, I'll be able to fill in, because I'm going to use that 2K filler primer to smooth it out. So the legs are looking pretty good. They feel real smooth. I sanded the Bondo with 150 grit sandpaper, and then I went over it real quick with the super fine sanding sponge. And I'm not too worried about the sanding scratches because the primer will fill most of that in. He will get really sanded down really, really good, and then a nice coat or two of the 2K primer. He'll get hit with that, and then on to the next step. So what I'm doing now is this is really the first time I've actually been in my studio for a chunk of time in like a month. So my goal this weekend is to work on the Sosa Spidey, the Cyclops repaint for Chris, which finally got the yellow sprayed. It looks good. It matches Wolverine pretty much damp straight on. I'm letting that dry because I finished spraying the top coat this morning, so I need to let that dry. And then I need to like do the belt buckle and the X-Men logo on the chest. But back to the Silver Surfer. So my client wanted the waves taken off of where the feet go. So I simply went in with the Dremel tool, with the grinding, with a, where is it? Anyway. Oh, with a sanding drum. With this guy, with a coarse sanding drum. And I carved it down as best I could. I'll have some putty work or Bondo work to do because in doing this, you know, this is the print, guys. This is what came off the 3D printer, so this isn't a casting. So in doing that, I revealed some of the putty work the factory had done on this piece in order to get it ready for molding and casting. So I got some bubbles that popped up here. So what I'm doing now, you can see this side's been ground down, but no sanding's been done. This side's been ground down, and it's pretty much sanded I just kind of hit my finger with 150 grit sandpaper and just kind of made a nice transition because I wanted to keep this part because I feel like just these keys alone wouldn't be enough to kind of lock them in place. I feel like it needs these little cutouts in the board and these little lips here to kind of keep them from twisting on the board, just as extra support. Because there's not much meat in his feet for the pins. I mean, I bet these pins, if the holes were drilled any deeper in the foot, they would come through the top of the foot. So there's not a lot of meat for the feet to grab onto. So I talked to my clients, I'm going to leave this part. Simply, I think it needs that as part of a key to help it. So now what I'm doing, this is actually a really tedious part right here, is you can see that these lines in the board go through the foot. And those were filled in with part of the print. So they were filled in all the way down here. And let's see if I can zoom in and show you. So if you notice here, you can see some sanding dust in there. You can see where the wave was, and it goes into that groove. So now the tedious part is I'm trying to sand that as smooth as possible, make this line as straight as possible. So I'm just simply doing that with sandpaper and wrapped around a file in a popsicle stick. So let's get this kind of pointing there. So basically I've got this 150 grit sandpaper, and unfortunately doing it this way, you go through sandpaper pretty quick. I just got this from Harbor Freight. It's inexpensive, but it's actually, for the price, it's actually really good sandpaper, surprisingly. A suggestion to anyone who builds models: don't buy cheap sandpaper. Good sandpaper is expensive, but I guarantee you will save yourself time and money later on if you buy the good stuff. When I buy like my wet sanding paper, I don't go to Home Depot and buy a sleeve of I go to the automotive paint supply store and I buy a sleeve of 50 sheets. And this right here, I just recently bought some new 600 grit sandpaper. The last time I bought a sleeve of sandpaper was 6 years ago. So it lasts you a very long time. Cut it up into small pieces. I've ordered some automotive self-adhesive sandpaper off Amazon yesterday. It comes in rolls. It's what I used to use when I painted cars. I've got some 150 grit, 180 grit, and 220 grit coming. And it's actually not that expensive. For a roll, it's like 18 bucks, like 25 yards long, and it fits perfectly on a sanding block like this. So that will last me a few years. So I spent like 60 bucks on sandpaper, which actually isn't too bad. But what it does is it doesn't clog as easily. It will sand longer. It's better. So do yourself a favor and buy good sanding paper. I did get this cheap stuff from Harbor Freight last night. I think this was like $2 for like 6 sheets, and it actually works pretty good. I'm surprised at how well it sands, and how easily it does not clog up. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking small pieces of it. Again, most of my videos are of me sanding, but if any of you follow Adam Savage, sanding is, I would say, in model building or anything, I would say 60 to 70% of it is sanding. It seems like a large percentage, but trust me, out of anything I do prep wise, I spend more time sanding than anything else. More time than masking, more time than anything else. It's all the steps necessary to get to a good paint finish and to correct errors or putty work and stuff like that. So trust me, invest in good sandpaper. Adam Savage said he could write a whole book on sanding, and actually that's, I think it's a great idea. Techniques of sanding, different grits to use for what. So like these grooves just happen to be the same width as my little file here. Unfortunately, this file is kind of old, and the teeth on the edge are pretty much worn off. But when I'm doing these grooves, I'm just not sanding where I need to remove material. I'm actually going past it, because just in case I sand it a little wider or whatever, it'll blend into this line down here, and it won't be so noticeable if it's just a hair off. It'll blend in better. So when you're sanding, you always want to sand past the area that you're working to a certain extent. Now there's a fine line that you don't want to create a repair area that's larger than necessary. When I used to paint cars, one of the goals was to keep your repair area as small as possible. And a lot of that had to do with how far out do you sand from the actual repair. How much room do you leave yourself for blending or feathering your body work and all that stuff. So rather than boring you with all this, I'm just kind of telling you what I'm doing. And once I'm done with this, I'll come back in here and I'll add a fillet of body filler. And while that fillet is still wet, I'll clean out these grooves. So I won't mix it so it hardens real quick. I kind of did that on accident the other day when I was working on the other leg for the Surfer. I put a little too much hardener in the Bondo, and it hardened faster than I wanted to, so it required a lot more sanding than I had anticipated, because it was pretty rough and wasn't very smooth to begin with. So yeah, and also have a repair here on the nose I got to do. It's not major. It's this little chip out right there, so I'll just put a little tape there and Bondo that, and that'll be good. So I'm going to work on this for a while, and then I'll come back and show you doing the fillet. Okay, so I've gone through and I have sanded those areas down. I sanded out the grooves as best I could for now. I just went to my auto buy supply store and I bought some Evercoat. So now this stuff is, it's very expensive. This little container is about $60. The reason I bought this is because it's easier to feather and it sands way easier than Bondo. So I do recommend it, but I would never use it for like large areas because it's so expensive. So like when I used to paint cars, I would do my Bondo work first, sand it all down, feather it, and then if I needed an additional skim layer of filler, or something was still a little bit low, I'd use Evercoat because I could put it on there. It sanded extremely easy and very smooth. So this was like a last step in body work. So what I'm going to do here, and also I went and bought some more spreaders. So this is way too big for what I need. These are they're cheap, they're easy to use. You can get them at Harbor Freight, or I just happened to be at the supply store, so I bought some. So it's really easy. I'm going to cut this down, and all I got to do is score it, just like that, and then it'll break. At least it should. Well, maybe this one won't do that. Usually they just break. I'm going to score it again. This one may be a little higher quality than I'm used to. But I mean, this one's cheap, it's like 29 cents, but this one just may be made out of a softer plastic. which is actually ideal because I want it to flex. So I'm just going to cut that down a little bit. Maybe. Come on. There we go. So I want to be able to come in here and put my glazing putty and kind of try to smooth it out as best as I could. So, and this is mixed up just like Bondo. And I want to make sure that I have, I've blown this out, I've vacuumed it out, gotten all the dust out of here because body filler or glazing putty will not stick if there's dust on the piece. Another thing about this is this will actually bond to primer, where Bondo doesn't. It just kind of flakes off. So I don't recommend it too often, but you know, you see I've got my area, my repair area is about this big. You know, it's about twice the size of this footprint. So it gives me room to feather this out and do my sanding. Mixes up just like Bondo. Put a little bit on. And you'll notice that this has a much creamier consistency. It's not nearly as thick. And I'm just going to put a little bit of hardener. Again, I don't want this to dry too fast. I want enough working time. And we're going to mix this up. And when you mix Bondo, you don't want to stir it, or glazing putty, you want to fold it into itself. Because what that does is it gets rid of any air bubbles while you're mixing. You still may get some, you know, just from the application process, but this will help reduce bubbles. So you fold it into itself. And they also don't recommend mixing this stuff on cardboard, simply because it can absorb some moisture from the filler. Since I'm doing very small amounts of it, I'm not worried about it. If I was working on a large surface like a car or something, I would use what's called the Bondo board, which is basically a big piece of plastic. They also make them which are really nice for paper. You just, once you're done, you peel the piece of paper off to a clean sheet. Okay, so now I've got a consistent color here. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a fillet around these foot marks. And I really don't care about getting into the cracks right now, because I'm going to clean it out. Once I kind of get this evened out. And since there is some unevenness in there, in those little cracks where kind of those wave, there's a bubble here, so I'm going to push this into the bubble. Hopefully it won't come back. So I'm not going to be too worried about being real clean on this. Again, I want to fill in kind of some of the bubbles that popped up, some of the putty work that I disrupted that the factory did, and I just want to kind of make a smoother transition. Because you go in there with a Dremel, and sometimes it's not the smoothest process for sanding a Dremel. Sometimes you get a little gouge here and there, so that's kind of what I'm filling in too, some gouges. So it looks like I mixed up just the right amount for this side. And then I bought another tool that I haven't had in a while. It's actually a wet sanding sponge, but I'm going to use it for dry sanding as well. Okay, so we're going to do this. You can see it's messy, but that's okay. Kind of feels like it's starting to kick off a little bit. Okay, before it kicks off too much, I want to clean out these cracks a little bit. I don't have to get it all out. I just want to get the majority of it out. And actually, there's a little bit in there. It'll help fill in some of the inconsistencies. Just like that. So I'm not pushing down real hard. I'm just kind of dragging this a little bit. And what that's doing is kind of help evening out any uneven areas down in that little crack. Hopefully it'll look smoother. So I'll go back in there and sand it again. I'm just gonna get, there's a bubble down there. I'll try to fill that in. So this is starting to kick off already. Okay, so it's now to the point where I really can't work it anymore. So I'm gonna let that sit for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll come back and sand it. So so the two other tools I picked up at the supply store was so this is a sanding sponge that you use for when you're color sanding either single stage paint or clear coats. So I'm also going to use this for sandpapers because it's soft and it'll be good for getting up in there and kind of blending in that fillet. And then I bought a squeegee. Now this is for squeegeeing when you're wet sanding again single stage paint or clear coats. You can wet sand, you squeegee it, and it'll show you if there's any orange peel left or nibs you got to take out. You can also use this for sanding too. It's nice and stiff, and it's good for getting into, like I'll use this on this part of the board, this whole board, and then I'll just switch to this when I'm going in and sanding the fillet. So even though they're, well, they say wet dry, this is wet dry squeegee, but you can use it for sanding, and this is for both also. So we're gonna let this dry for about 15 minutes, and we'll come back. And then if you don't know, with filler or glazing putty, just let it dry on your spreader, and it'll peel off when it's cured. All right, you ready for some more sanding? More sanding. Again, lots of sanding. All right, so this is set up pretty good. I started to kind of go in here and clean out some of these little grooves a little bit, just with a full piece of sandpaper. Again, my goal is to make sure that these are the same width and everything. So I just got it folded over here, and this stuff sands so easily. It's really, really good stuff. So if you buy this and you use it, you'll know where your money's going as far as its workability, for sure. It's just really, really high quality filler. So I don't mind spending the money on really good materials. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what's your time worth, you know? If I did this with Bondo, yeah, I could do it. It would just take me twice as long to sand because it's harder to sand. It's just the nature of the material. So just putting when I cleaned out those the grooves with the popsicle stick, I left some down in there because it was really hard to get in there, kind of sand it smooth. So I left a little filler in there to kind of help even out the uneven areas, and so it's looking really good. The truth will be when I throw a coat of primer on this. But it feathers really, 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 really well, man. Okay, so I got those kind of cleaned out. You get that. So now I got this hard rubber sponge. Now, if you get one of these, you gotta be careful because one side's got 3M logo on it and the other side's flat. You don't want to sand with the side that's got the logo on it because you want a flat surface. So I'm using this hard sponge here to kind of feather up. And this is 150 grit sandpaper, so this should sand down pretty quickly. So what I'm doing is I'm starting from the outside and working my way into the repair to get a feather. So you know you're getting a good feather when you see the kind of this, where it transitions really smoothly from the filler to the surface you're working on. And then constantly running your hands and fingers over things. You'll be surprised that you'll think something looks smooth, and then you'll run your hands over it and you'll find there's a dip or something, or it's not quite there. Your fingers are much more sensitive than what your eyes can see. So whenever I'm sanding a piece and getting it ready for paint, I'm constantly rubbing my hands over it. It almost looks like I'm molesting it, but that's all in an effort to feel all the areas that need work. So what I'll do is I'll sand from the outside going in first with this hard sponge. Now this board itself is not perfectly smooth, and I'm not going to go in here and glaze this whole thing. There's a dip right here. I'm not going to glaze this whole thing. It would, I mean, it's just, what I'm doing is I'm fixing the areas from what my client asked for. So I'll kind of do this side and show you the process, and then I'll do the rest and show you the end results. So this is actually looking really good. You can see that I've got a nice transition from the surfboard to the filler. And then like here where I got this into the crack a little bit, I'll sand this a little bit. Make sure it's a nice smooth transition. So when I get the sandpaper that I ordered, I'll show you the difference between a good sandpaper and a cheap sandpaper. Even though this is working good, there's signs that you have a good sandpaper versus a cheap sandpaper. Like this stuff is like the stuff you get at Home Depot. And when you fold it over to sand, it cracks. So you really don't have any sanding particles on that edge. Good sandpaper, when you do that, it won't crack. It'll basically roll over, and you'll still have this really fine edge for sanding. So that's one advantage to buying good sandpaper. Is that when you roll it or bend it like that, the actual sand particles on the paper won't crack. So that's one advantage to having good sandpaper. I wish the shop that I went to this morning had, you can buy really flexible applicators, putty applicators that really bend, because I would have been able to kind of apply this a little smoother, which would mean less sanding, but I love the sand. Not really, but okay, so and also when you're sanding, you want to adjust your sanding. So never sand straight across. If you're sanding, you want to sand at a 45-degree angle from one way, and then reverse it 45 from the other direction. So what that's doing is ensuring that you have a flat surface, because if I just went back and forth like this, I would sand grooves. So I'm going like this first, and then I'm coming this way. So constantly going this way, and then try to come this way. Now just ensure that you have a flat surface. Sometimes that's hard to do, depending on what you're doing. Okay. So I've got this nice feather here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this hard sanding block up into here, a little closer to where the foot goes, and I'm going to knock down. You can see here the different colorations in the filler. That means I got a low spot there. You can see where the low spots. So I'm going to get those out with this sanding block, and then I'll refine the fillet with the sponge, so I can get it in there and I can shape it. So what I'm going to do is this will be a really long work in progress. Some guys really hate the long videos. I get a lot of compliments like, thanks for showing us the whole process. And I'm the kind of guy that when I'm watching a video and I'm trying to learn a process, I'd rather have a long video, something like, I know like my buddy Cam mentions he'll put on my videos because I talk a lot. He'll just put them on in the background because sometimes I'll mention something that he didn't think of or whatever. So I try to talk throughout the whole process while I'm doing this. but I feel it's more beneficial to those who want to learn how to do something to show the whole process rather than showing little bits and pieces. Um, I learned better that way. So if these may be long, they may be an hour or 2 hours long. Where some other guys will do a work in progress video and the whole video is 30 minutes and it's from the time they open the kit to the time it's painted. Yeah, it's kind of fun if you just want to kind of see the quick process. But again, if you want to learn something, I do my best to kind of explain my thought process while I do stuff. And then also some guys that do watch the whole video will sometimes mention, give me suggestions, or have you thought of this, or have you tried that? And sometimes I'll learn something from people who watch the video and maybe suggest something. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to come back to this this sponge here. And this is really flexible. So I'm going to come in here with the sponge. Just kind of really work this fillet. I gotta say, when my client first has to take those little waves off, like, oh, I don't know, okay, whatever. I don't think that'll look good, but actually, I think this is gonna look much cleaner. I think, and I don't think I've ever seen one of these where the little wave thingies have been taken off. So it'll be nice. So again, I'm not going to show the whole process of, as I just said, I'm going to show the whole process, but I'm going to show you this side, and then it's just the same thing all the way around the foot on both feet. So even though I'm not showing the whole process, because it'll take me a few hours, this will show you what to do, or how I do this process. When you work on a big flat surface like this, try your best not to sand with your bare hand, because what you have here is you have 5 little sanding pads or sanding blocks, and what you'll do is you'll sand, I've seen it, you sand like this and you'll sand 5 channels in whatever it is you're sanding. So try not to use your bare hand too much. And I'll use it when I'm scuffing something up, or like in the initial sanding of this, I went in with my bare hands obviously, but now the putty work and the sanding with the blocks is going to, if I did get any grooves in there, it's going to even that out and take care of that. But especially when you're sanding body work or filler like this, don't ever sand with your bare hands. You will sand channels into it. You may not be able to see it, but once you get paint and gloss coat on it, you'll see it. Trust me. I've learned the hard way a long time ago when I first started painting cars. I'll just sand with my bare hands. Get all painted, you buff it out, and then you see the marks from your fingers, and you go, oh shit, you gotta sand it down and repair it. Alright, so this looks pretty good. I'm gonna vacuum it out real quick. Okay, so you can see this side here, nice and feathered, feels really smooth. Nice transition into the foot here. I'll go in, I got a little sludge here on the inside here. I'll just go in and sand that off real quick. Come over the edge a little bit, no biggie. I'll have to do that all the way around. Another thing I did, which I didn't do on camera, is I fixed the crack in this key. It had a crack in it. And all I did is I took my talcum powder and super glue mix. I smeared it in there really well, and I hit it with some kicker, and then I just sanded it flat. I actually tried to take it apart, but I think the factory actually had gone in there and glued it back together a little bit, so it wasn't able to get it apart. So I thought I'd have to basically rebuild that key, but I didn't have to. Okay, so this side of this foot looks good. It feels good. Yeah, so that side's done. So I'm going to do the rest of it, and then then after that, basically everything needs a light sanding, and then it's ready for primer. So maybe after I get everything lightly sanded, then I'll call this work in progress done after that, show you that, and then the next video will be priming. Okay, so I got those fillets done. I fixed a little chip in the tip here, and then gave everything a light sanding with a I got a brand new super fine sanding sponge because I wanted to be able to use the full cutting power of this. So now, as always, it looks rougher as you go until you get some primer and paint on. So now this guy is ready for its first round of primer. And I always say first round because once you put primer on it, some things will be revealed. Any areas that need additional work. I see a few little pinholes here that I'll probably have to go back and do some additional glazing putty, but for the most part, this looks really good. Got rid of those waves. So yeah, so I'm gonna put that to the side, and we're gonna check out the. So it's been. Let's see, what time is it right now? It's in the afternoon. I did this Aves putty this morning, first thing around. Let's see, about 8 a.m. So it's had about 5 hours to kind of cure a little bit, and it feels really good. So that just needs to cure overnight, and then I will give this guy a light sanding. I don't want to do it right now. I want to wait till that's cured, and I'll go over him with a light sanding of the superfine sanding sponge, and just like the board, and then we'll do primer. So I'm going to call this work in progress video done on the prep, because again, it's just more sanding. I mean, how much sanding do you guys want to watch? So today, since I've got basically all day to work, I'm going to break out the Morbius kit and get going on that, because I should have started on that a while ago. So anyway, I'm just going to back this up and throw the surfer on here. So now, my trick, since he's all one piece, painting this guy is going to be a real challenge, because I've got to find a way to mount him. If he was in separate pieces, it would be relatively simple. I could mount the leg, or the arms and the head, and then the torso. So what I'm probably going to do is make some wooden pegs with steel rods coming out that emulate the keys in the board. Because he's on the board, he's very stable. So that lets me know that if I just kind of replicate that in some sort of mounting apparatus, I'll be able to get him mounted. I will have to mount him basically in the same angle as on the board, which is even up a little bit more than that. I can't have him. I gotta get the angle right so the support is right. The engineering on this is actually really, really well, considering how small these keys are. That he's imbalanced just right to sit in those small keys. So here we go. So the waves are gone. These look really good. So yeah, so this work in progress is done, and the next one will be some priming. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Bye.